Everybody to the Voorheesville Central School District Curriculum Committee meeting of September 2021. My name is Tim Creamer. I'm the chairman of the Curriculum Committee, and all members of the committee are present. We are going to take a look at some state and local data, kind of picking up from where we ended up last year, and talk a little bit about where we're going from here. So this is kind of trying to reset get our bearings straight from here on out, I guess. And I'm going to turn it over to Frank McCree and to Karen Conroy.
So before we begin, I just want to state that we can't share the embargoed data right now from last year. So the 3 through 8 assessments, those kind of things, we have them. This isn't a session where we can share them or discuss them. So unfortunately, you're not going to get those assessments and understand what we know. And really, I can't even talk about what we know publicly at this point. The only way I can talk about it is if it impacts student learning and directly with inside the building until the embargo is gone. So, you know, I'm going to have to be vague as I can, as so can Karen, on that regards with the embargoed stuff. But what we do have, we can share.
Frank, can you tell us why it is embargoed?
Tim, I'm going to be honest with you, I really don't know the complete answer. Karen, do you?
I believe because it has to do with the certification of the data. Okay. That the superintendent does. And that was postponed. There were a couple problems with a couple of the student management systems this year. So usually that's done in August, and it was postponed, a couple of those through October. And I think that's probably why, because it hasn't been certified yet. So it's still considered preliminary.
Karen, your camera seems to be facing a different direction. We're not seeing much of you.
You can probably see me when I do this, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, yeah, I have my PowerPoint in front of me this way, but right now I'm looking at you over here when I'm talking to you, so I apologize for that.
All right, well, so given that we don't have embargo data available to us, what can we talk about?
Go ahead, Karen. Why don't you Karen has a presentation and has the data that we can show you and kind of tell you from there.
Sure. So we can look at our local data, and that's what I was hoping we could hopefully glean some information from, because I think the question that comes up that we really want to think about and that we're all eager to learn is, how has the accommodations that we've made to instruction because of the pandemic affected learning? And so right now we've got some local assessments that we can take a peek at. And, you know, this is stuff from the end of last year. We'll be getting new data in the next month. We've had a couple hiccups with our online testing that we use, the STAR assessment. There have been some problems with that this year, but hopefully in the next week or two, we'll have all that updated data. This is all end of year data to look at, though. So I will start as soon as my computer lets me. Okay, so some STAR data results. Now, couple things. When you run a STAR assessment report, you can run it and set it to the New York State proficiency level, or you could run it based on what they call like a school level. And the school level is the typical national norms where they're only looking at the 40th percentile to consider proficiency. It's a lot higher with New York State and Common Core standards and expectations. So we set it to the New York State proficiency level. I put that in quotes because this is according to STAR and how they match up that way. And we can look at this data in two ways. Hopefully you can kind of see my cursor as I do this. Can you, people? So we can look at it across the grade. We have the end of 2019, our last full year of school here before last year. And then we have the end of last year. So we can see how a grade is doing based on how we performed in our with our instruction last year, which was a kind of strange year. And we can also follow a cohort. So I've color coded it that way. So you could say the kids who were by the end of first grade, June 2019, we had 39% who were not meeting, according to STAR, the state proficiency for reading. And then when we saw them the end of last year, they'd be in third grade. And that number moved down to only 21% not meeting that. of course, the STAR is only one data point. It's not the be all end all. You have to have students engaged and doing their best and wanting to do all those things. But at least it is something for us to consider as we go through this. And as you look, you can see pretty much by the grade level, last year, our students tended to perform pretty well on the STAR across the board here. You know, 8th grade in reading wasn't too much of a change, but for the most part, and 5th grade wasn't too much of a change, but you really saw some decent returns, because I think we were all questioning what was that, how were our kids going to fare with the 6, 7, 8 or 7, 8 hybrid model, and then the way we had to do the instruction in the elementary and into 6th grade. Any comments or questions about that before I go to the math?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if anyone else had some, but I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, this is a huge shift. And I'm wondering if the assessments changed in any way in those 2 years. What's different?
So there's a couple things that are different. The assessment, as far as we know, did not change. What is different is the pods that we utilized for the instruction model last year. So you're looking at our online classes, if they took the exam or not, and you're looking at the podded classes, right?
Correct.
This is it. The teachers taught, and I know it was a difficult year, but they taught the curriculum that they've taught in the past. The STAR assessments really don't change from year to year to year, as far as I know, and the proficiency level for New York State doesn't change. So, we haven't dug deep into, the exacts, but we were really pleased with the numbers, and what we were seeing is that we were seeing growth of our students over a year where people didn't think we would be seeing growth. So, when we look at this, there's some bright points of it.
Yeah,
but again, you have to remember, it's 1 point.
Yeah, it's only 1 point. And I will say, Frank, our teachers taught reading, writing, and math, right? So there were a lot of things that our children normally had opportunities to experience in a normal class 2 years before. This is really what they focused on. And, you are leaving out a lot of other things that those kids, would have had if it wasn't for the pandemic.
So the other question I would have is, what did data look like before 2019? Is this, is this something that jumps around a lot, or is this just a very big shift?
I honestly don't know. I could dig in and see if I still have this. You lose the stars if you don't pull them off and save them. I believe I did save them. I don't know if it was starting 2019 or 2018, but I can check that for you if we'd be interested in seeing that.
Oh, I hate to say it, but I would.
Yeah.
Not any rush. I know there's a million things, but
I think the point, I think it's interesting, but I don't know if it's going to help us really understand our students, because again, I don't want to put so much time into STAR saying this is it. I think when we get the embargoed results, and we look at the most recent STAR, right? That was
because how do they hold it?
Really telling, because I want to know how our kids are now and where they're faring in an assessment, and then what we saw from that state assessment, utilizing that. Looking at the 19 data and 18 data is helpful, but I think knowing where we are from 19, 21, and then to right now is going to be really telling to us.
Let me follow up on what Rachel's asking. Did the assessment change?
Karen?
Not to my knowledge, it has not changed. We did have people taking it online in our remote. I can go back and double check that's including everyone. I don't know if there's anybody who was missing because of the remote. If that was a hard piece, I can double check that. I'm pretty sure it's it's the same large group.
Well, I guess I'll ask an opinion. Do you think that was less rigorous in June of 2021 versus June of 2019?
I wouldn't know why it would be. It's an adaptive test. And so it moves with the individual student's ability.
I see.
I will say that we did start last year our new phonics program in K in first grade.
Mhm.
And I'm, so far pleased with that. So we'll see if that has any effect overall. I don't know.
I also
Okay.
have, my other question would be, what are the teachers seeing as the people in the classroom with the kids beyond what the assessments are showing? Are the teachers finding that the kids are where they would have been, 3 years prior, if assuming that the teacher is teaching the same the same grade level that they had taught in previous years? They very often have an understanding of where the kids are by any point in a given year.
Mhm.
And what's their take on it? And does this jive with that, or is this completely off base? And Frank, just to say, the reason I'm curious about previous years is not to give too much credibility or depth. Sorry, this is what happens after good eats. Is not to give too much weight to STAR assessment, but to say, do these numbers jump a lot? This is a huge jump. To have jumps of 20, basically like 50% change is a huge change. So is that something that happens year on year, or is this truly possibly because teachers were teaching differently? And I just want to understand that in some small way. Not to say like, oh my gosh, this is a huge thing, this we can learn so much from, but just to understand if it is a normal thing to see, or is this like really a shock?
Karen can see if she can find it so we can know if it jumps or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
When it regards to teachers, I just want to preface this is we haven't had the opportunity to really understand what teachers are doing, what they're seeing, because it's only been 16 days, 17 days. So I'm going to deflect to the head of our VTA to give her reflection on it. But for Karen and I to give you a reflection or know what staff are doing, like we haven't really, to be honest, we're trying not to talk to staff right now because they got to get in their lane and do what they need to do with their kids. And we're not going to ask them what they're seeing or surveying because that's not where we are. October, yeah, we're going to be there. September is really not that point. But Kelly, I mean, you can speak to what the teachers are seeing in the elementary.
Well, we're seeing a lot of kids that really haven't been in classrooms, and certainly haven't been in classrooms or groups of 23, 24, which is what we have in our first and second grade classes. That you went from pods of 12 to now 24. So there's a big difference in just kids knowing how to be students, knowing what their job is, knowing that they have to listen and follow directions. Some students were homeschooled last year and are now back in the classroom. So there's a lot of differences, and just trying to weed through that to get to the academic piece is that, they're excited to be together. And
I've heard the exact same thing in the halls. Yeah.
But, you see holes, but it's also too early to really pinpoint exactly what is that. Is it that they just haven't gotten used to being back in school yet? And once we get settled in and reinforce some of those things that, they jump right back up, or are there gaps? And we really haven't been able to identify that yet. We've had some technology issues, not on our part, that were outsiders, difficulties that have kind of slowed our process of gathering data and really knowing where kids are, because where they end in June isn't always where they enter in September. So we're still trying to get some updated information so that we can really pinpoint where their abilities are and where we need to support them.
That's a really good point, Kelly, especially for the younger students with reading and math. That summer they can lose a lot.
They can, and sometimes some kids do a lot of work over the summer, and maybe they ended the year not feeling like they were beat up and felt like I'm done, and they didn't put a lot of effort into the test. I mean, these assessments are always like just a quick snapshot, and trying to put that, take that into consideration when we also talk to the teacher and see what they're seeing in the classroom and with their monitoring tools that they use, and to really pinpoint where they're at. So it's kind of too soon to tell, but certainly feeling the difference between having 12 kids and 24 kids is a difference, for sure.
Very interesting. Thank you for that preliminary. I totally get that this is not the time to be asking this question.
Well, you'll get a very different answer now than you will a month from now.
Right.
And not to
Yeah.
say that now's answer isn't also really important. I just can't pinpoint whether it's kids getting back into the swing of things, or if they really are truly lacking skills. And either one could be the case at this point.
Let me ask a question about the context of these. So June 2019, that would be a proficiency math assessment based on students who had been in-person instruction up to that point,
They were in person all year.
all year.
That was the last year we had a full
June
year.
21, those kids had not been in-person instruction for a year. Am I
Well,
correct?
they could have been. If it's in the elementary school, they were in every day if they chose not to be virtual.
Okay.
They were here every day, but they were in pods of 12.
We
So
don't have it for, yeah.
my
we don't
math
have it for
lesson was
2020. Sorry.
12 students at a time.
So what would this data tell us?
Well, you could say smaller class sizes.
Mm-hmm.
We would take that any day of the week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I think Karen made a
Sorry.
good point as well. So the smaller class sizes is one, and I'm not lying, Kelly. I see that too. The other thing is, Karen really brought up the solid point when we talked about it, and she brought it up again tonight, is the teachers taught math, reading, and writing. That is really all they did last year. And there was no enrichments, that we had very little of the other stuff that goes along with it that makes a whole student, makes a whole education program. It really was math, reading, and writing. And that, Kelly?
As we were providing instruction for the our podmates to cover, a lot of that was, yes, there was some science and social studies, but a lot of it was that supplementary ELA materials. So again, there was our main focus across the board was ELA and math.
Yeah.
So that could certainly account for this as well.
You can see on this math piece, there's no way in 2019 we had 3/4 of our 8th graders not proficient in math. We know that that's not true. This is, whether this is just students saying in June, I don't care to do this STAR test one more time, I'm not sure. But, so we look at the information, but there are going to obviously be places where it's like, this happened and, we know it's not perfect data by any means. But you can still see with this again that we have, whether it's across the grade level or you're following the cohort, you do see, which personally, that's the thing that when Frank and I were looking at this, I'd really like to see, okay, we had 43% who were below state proficiency in 1st grade. We didn't have them take it at the end of June. That was when we were, at home after the school closure, doing maybe some asynchronous work. And then here we are the following year when they're in end of 3rd grade. And we do see an improvement there. I think that's pretty impressive. So for what it's worth, that's that piece of data. And again, once we get new STAR information, that'll be helpful too. A little Fontes and Pinnell that I wanted to share with you. As you guys probably know, our Fontes and Pinnell is our reading benchmark assessment. And normally we do it 3 times a year with our K2, and our 3rd grade does it usually twice a year, and Progress Monitor does a middle one as well for students that can have some concern about. So what I thought would be interesting would be to take a look at, I'm calling them the kindergarten pandemic cohort. These are the kids who were in kindergarten when our school shut down in March of 2020. So we have only, I don't know why, but we have only 55% based on those Faunus and Pinnell assessments, 55% meeting what they consider the grade level expectation at that time. These are the kids who are just starting to read. So, you can easily catch up through the year, but we don't know because we don't have them again in June to do this. I found it interesting that when we came back in September, we're right around the same place. So we did not end up with less students still meeting those grade level expectations.
Karen, can I ask a question that was going to put you on the spot? I'm sorry.
Sure.
The regression for summer, is that typical to see just such a low regression?
No.
Okay.
I mean, usually we do, well, I couldn't give a percentage, but we usually do see a good chunk of kids go back maybe a level or so.
Yeah, I'm surprised at the
I
regression.
was very surprised when I saw that. And then,
January to September, that's very interesting.
right? And then in June, so in June of first grade, we actually showed some gains, which is great, 69% meeting grade level expectations. So I thought that was interesting data that I wanted to share because I think with our K1-2, I mean, obviously you're nervous about at any grade level, but I think this is where they tend to lose the most over the summer. And we had our fears of what kind of gains would they be making with this, the new instruction that we're giving. Another thing that we could look at is the kindergarten COVID comeback cohort. I know that's a tongue twister there, but I'm using that 2019, those 2019 results. We had 84%, according to the Faunus and Pinnell, meeting grade level expectations. That was a normal year. That was the year like any other year. And then last year, which was a little different, we have 86% meeting grade level expectations. What this tells me is that, things didn't look, while things look very different in the classroom, our bottom line results for these reading assessments with our kindergarten students look similar. I was pleasantly surprised by that. Any comments or questions before I move on that one? This, as I said, I can't share any 3 through 8 data, but I do want to let people know the number of students tested there aren't that many large differences between 2019's testing and 2021's testing. So I think when we actually can share those results, it'll be interesting that it's actually, worth paying attention to. That's just the average, I think, from the ELA. Math might be 1 or 2 off on each of those.
And when we can share them, Karen's going to do the same thing. Just so you know, we were ready to share them the other day.
I have the slides ready.
And then we realized that they were still embargoed and they weren't going to, so we had to change our plan a little bit. But what you'll see is the same cohorting that we did for the other ones is the same that you'll see for that. So you'll actually be able to see how they did on the state assessments as well.
So,
wait, any questions on the elementary before we move on?
I think we need to find a way to look at some of what we're getting from this, though, like Kelly was saying, the small class sizes. And I know the focus was there and to the detriment of other valuable things, but I get that picture that having a class of 12 and being able to give a kid individual attention, even though you're only in the room for half the time, is a very different experience, having just been in a group with 50 kids versus 20 kids, 22 kids. I mean, just that difference was striking. And I know that, when there's only 10 or 12 kids, it's a totally different ballgame. So just to saying that this is, it's very interesting for whatever it's worth by the numbers. This might be one of those things that we get out of, we get some valuable insights.
So moving to the high school, I don't have the regions or I'm not able to share the regions either. So I have decided to take a look at high school end of year course grades. So the way I can pull this data from our management system breaks it into a few different categories. So we know that there are different concessions that were made. Certainly it wasn't the exact same year, but in terms of all the curriculum, because you were doing probably even more prioritized standards, there may have been opportunities for students to do projects versus the typical final exam, that type of thing. So things may look different. But I thought it would be interesting, or maybe this would be the closest I could get to our local data to touch the temperature of high school and take a look at how students performed. Remember, I won't say that. Never mind. I'll just stick with where I am. So you can see for science, the large majority of students in that 85 to 100% 100 category for their final grades. Obviously, we want more of that rather than less of that. And then I do pull up the 2019 if you want to see if how that compares to the 2019 year. So this is the 18-19 year. And you can see in certain areas it's similar, that 85 to 100, and in other places it's what we did last year may have been a little lower, and physics is a little higher. Not necessarily strangely different though.
Biology is pretty weird.
Yeah. But chemistry is almost exactly the same.
Yeah. It's striking how high chemistry and physics are. Like, if
That might
you're
have to do
looking
with the advanced students going into it, maybe.
I'm curious about it because it's hard to discern the. I would wonder how one can discern.
Don't most students that let me rephrase that. Do you need to have more than 2 years of science to graduate? Is that why? Because most students aren't taking chemistry and physics?
Yeah, that's kind of the one thing I was looking at here is
Yes, those
not
numbers.
every child takes chemistry and physics. So it's a smaller percentage amount of our student population who does.
Yes.
Typically, those are the students that are taking an advanced regions course or advanced regions, I don't want to say track, but schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why it's kind of interesting if we look at other local data as we really try to understand our failure rates and our succession rates and what the career plans are for our kids, because then you start to get an understanding of where those juniors and seniors are who took biology in 10th grade, to see where they're going, because that's a missing group that you're not seeing here, right? You're missing a good 30% of students, I'm estimating, from earth science, biology to chemistry and physics. Does that, Kelly, I think that's what you were saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they take other sciences, or they go to the CTE program. I
think maybe they take environmental science or forensics. I think they need a third science, but they may not be taking chemistry or physics.
Correct.
Social studies from last year. Again, it's good to see that our biggest numbers, of course, are in that 85 to 100, which is the 85 is mastery, so that's where I went with that. And then 18-19. So grade 11 would be U.S. history and AP U.S. history students combined, right? It would be multiple.
Can I make a comment on what I'm seeing?
Yep.
It's nice to see that there wasn't an inflation of grades during the COVID pandemic year, and it seems very, yes, there's some changes in this, but you're not seeing like, all right, you got 90% of our students got 85 to 100s, and it's kind of equal to each year, which I kind of like to see that. It's showing me that the teachers were grading or assessing in a very similar way that they were in previous years. So,
Yeah, you're hoping that there was flexibility, but kept the rigor.
yeah.
Well, and we did hear throughout the year the challenges of getting kids to engage,
Yep.
and that it was hard on kids being home and here, and that was challenging in so many ways for them. And so even some of your maybe typically high achieving students struggled.
Yeah.
And that's reflected in these numbers.
That's true. That's true.
Which is not a bad thing. That was the
It is a thing, right? It is what that is. Here's English. And interestingly, I will bring up that I did reach out to just the department supervisors to ask about, how things look, how they felt with, if they've talked to their teachers about this. And it's interesting because I think when you're looking at science, those are different courses, different years. So maybe last year's earth science, whether you did well or not, is really not going to necessarily reflect on your biology class this year. So I think for the most part, people were feeling like, oh, I'm not seeing anything unusual. I think math is the place that it affects you a little bit more. In particular, I was told Algebra 2, right? Because those were the kids who shut down during Algebra 1. We closed during Algebra 1. And we'll get to that. But I'm also thinking of it for English because, that spirals, that you're doing those same standards, but at a more complicated, sophisticated way as time goes on. So that does matter through the years. You can see that makes a difference in 11th grade there for sure. 9th grade doesn't look very different between the two school years, but 11th grade does for sure. Okay, I'll go on to math. Algebra, I'm not looking at our advanced students who've been pulled out and are in the middle school taking algebra. This is our high school Algebra 1, our Algebra 1B, our basic algebra students. They're all combined in this. And then for geometry, I also have geometry honors and basic geometry combined into that. And then I've included, it says it should say intermediate algebra and Algebra 2 together.
Interesting how geometry is almost,
Isn't it?
yeah.
And I'm trying to understand the online piece of that, right? Because we know how difficult, and we heard from when our department chair, when Christine Kelly spoke to us, this group last year, she talked about how easy it is for students to get away with not doing the work or doing a test and having, not being able to monitor it well. That you can allow for that. So it's just interesting for me to see this because what did geometry, what could they do online differently than maybe Algebra 2?
Interesting.
I'm not sure.
Karen, what do you do with this information as far as professional development, for example?
Yeah, I was going to say, share it with our chairs. Our chairs have an awful lot of data right now that we're sharing with them. And really, I think the idea to know what's coming into your class and to encourage what's that assessment, what prerequisites are needed that aren't there. And I think classroom teachers really are going to have to, pinpoint that, what needs to be retaught, what needs to be preset. There are prerequisites, of course, for anything before you, sometimes before you teach the lesson, you need to make sure that they have the skills that they need before you can move on. I think Algebra 2 is going to be a harder one for the reason why that I mentioned, just that those students were in Algebra 1 and then we shut down and they didn't have the in-person for that March through June, which was really a lot of the meat of Algebra 1.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note too is this is big overview data. Like the teachers have to dig deep into it and look at the individual student data because it comes down to students, right? And grouping of kids and where they stand with in their curriculum. And that's the hard work. That's what we were talking about today is how do we find time for staff and give them the tools to do that? Because you have to find out where those lower performing students are and then where they struggled and what concepts they struggled at. That's digging down deeper into those assessments. This is the big overview picture, big picture of it. The teacher's got to dig deeper and look at where those kids' weaknesses are, where it fell in the curriculum, so for curriculum alignment purposes later on, and then how do they address it and supplement it into their classes now. That's a big task. And that's a task that they do every year and they should be doing every year. But that's the hard one. And that's where they have to get into using this. And that's where we have to get as building leaders is to find time to help support them to do that where it's not overwhelming them.
Put it into our day, put it into our faculty meetings or whatever, like you mentioned, Frank, earlier. Yeah. And that is what I have for the high school data. There's very little else for me to pull. Anybody have any comments or questions?
I think this is great data. I really appreciate seeing the kind of side by side. And is that the kind of thing that ever gets shared in a presentation with parents? Or would that be you're just asking for trouble?
We share it with the board.
We share it with the board. We share it with you here.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to kind of where I always like to stand is this is snippets and viewpoints.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at, Frank and Karen, is I see this stuff and I go, boy, that's kind of surprising. I might have thought that maybe kids, I don't know how to interpret it, honestly. But I'm wondering if I had a kid who was one of the children who was being assessed here or was taking these tests, I might have been fooled into thinking this kid's doing really well when he isn't, or I would have thought maybe he wasn't doing so well and he is. So I'm just wondering to what extent this information would be useful in being shared with parents. They may not interpret it well.
I guess I'm wondering, Tim, are you talking about, say, the high school data, or are you talking about the because I mean, I guess that's just understanding how your student, if my student got an 89 in a class overall, what's the average? I guess that you're just kind of wondering where does that fall but I don't know that data is out there that way. I mean, I think the guidance counselors know that and could give a parent feedback on it.
So if a parent said, hey, listen, I'm a little concerned about how well my kid is doing in algebra. Doesn't seem like he or she is getting it. They would have a way to come in and meet with somebody and talk about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely, they'll meet with the teacher will talk to them where it's going, they'll talk to the guidance counselor. That's things that they'll do. I think it's important not to, say it's me and my parents concerned about me coming in and I have a 75 and they're concerned I'm not doing well. That 75 from my skill level might be the, good. And my teacher wants to get me to an 80 and we're going to get there. But saying, all right, well, 20% of our student population only has 70s might actually do more damage to those students.
Yeah.
Than better damage than helping them.
Yeah.
It's about where that student is and where we can get them to go and not where they compare to the rest of their class sometimes.
You're right.
We have to be careful with the stress that's put on high school students now with grades and with those components. That's another thing where if you start sharing that data saying 75% of your class are 85 or 100, and,
right.
Kids are going to say, well, where am I in that 85 to 100? Am I in the lower end or am I kids really do look at that and that becomes their world sometimes. And that stressor is very, very dangerous for kids. So we have to try to mitigate that as best we can. We want that rigor. We want some of that stress, but we don't want it to become their world. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I do feel that it's important that we're honest with these kids and we're not making them feel like they're doing extraordinarily well when they're not. And it's going to be a big surprise to them when they finally graduate. I'm not trying to be a hard ass. I'm just saying that I don't want us to be so protective of their self-esteem that we're not being honest with them.
I don't really understand that, to be honest with you, because if we're very honest with our students, we give them feedback.
That's all I'm asking.
They're inflated in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, it was pretty clear on that data that was given that we did not inflate grades last year.
No.
So, I mean, we're honest with our kids, and I think that's the best. This kind of data is meant for those kids, right? And for us to see where we are. The bigger data, those state assessment data and stuff, that's the that's the forward-facing data of a district. That's the district report card.
Right.
You know, and I think that's the one that's important to show. But yeah, I mean, we're very honest with our students and where they stand.
Good.
I mean,
I'm really asking
Rachel
for.
and Trish have kids currently in the district. I mean, and I have kids in the district, and I'll tell you flat out, I knew where my kids stand last year, and you know how they were doing and how they were succeeding or not succeeding. And I'll be honest, K-12, since the years I've been here, I've always known where my kids have been.
And you know what the right fit is for your student, for your child too. You know, I think you got to count on the parents knowing when to push and when not to push, hopefully, you know. Hey, a 75 is great in this class, but the 75 in English, maybe you should be doing a little bit more, you know, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have anything else on our agenda?
No.
Are there any questions or comments?
I appreciate trying to look at whatever data we have, but it's also, I'm a little confused of what to make of the data, even though I want to look at it, if you will, but I don't really know if I can draw many conclusions from that yet. I think we'll just have to wait and see what the teachers say later on, and then find ways to support whatever they need.
Trish, I got to be honest with you, I think that's where we are. You know, to be honest, it's like,
Right.
that's great. And it's showing that we might have had, it's showing that we might have had really good growth in reading for our kids.
Right.
Let's see where that is now.
Right.
That's where I really want to see where we stand and then understand where we can go. That's going to be important for us. This is great to kind of show us a little bit, but it's hard to make that many.
And one thing it's not telling us is for those who are not growing and achieving is, I know this sounds kind of weird, but the ones who are struggling, are they struggling even more than they would have 2 years ago? We don't know about that. We don't know if the gaps are actually a wider gap. We just know what we have is a percentage of above and below. And that's a concern too, you know, because we didn't have our normal structures for academic intervention support in place the same way last year. So that's something to look at. And Kelly, you'll be digging right into that as our math AIS teacher.
I've been digging at it every day, trying to see what I can find.
Anything else?
Well, thank you for pulling that together. I appreciate just a preliminary, not definitive, but the observation is valued. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Karen, thank you very much. Frank, Kelly, Rachel, Patricia, Trish, thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.